Clint Eastwood, a name that echoes through decades of Hollywood history like the sound of a lone cowboy's footsteps crossing a silent frontier town. For many people across the world, Clint Eastwood is the ultimate symbol of toughness. The man with the steel eyes, the unshakable voice, the hero who rides alone, fights alone, and lives by his own rules. From unforgettable westerns like The Good, The Bad, and the Ugly to iconic modern classics like Gran Torino and $1 Million Baby, Eastwood carved his place as one of the greatest film figures of all time. But behind every Hollywood legend lies a real human story, one that the cameras never captured fully. For Clint Eastwood, the man behind the myth lived a life filled with complexity, passion, and emotional storms. A life marked not only by success and admiration, but also by secrets, heartbreaks, and relationships that were often as dramatic as the characters he played on screen. Clint Eastwood's journey began far from red carpet glamour. Born in San Francisco in 1930, during the difficult years of the Great Depression, he learned early what survival meant. His family moved constantly, searching for stability, often living paycheck to paycheck. Clint grew up without luxury, no fame, no spotlight. Just a quiet boy trying to find his place in a world that gave little. He worked odd jobs as a teenager, fixing cars, stacking hay, cleaning factory floors, doing anything he could to help and to grow strong. That upbringing shaped him deeply. It built a worker, not a dreamer. It built a man who didn't speak much but listened hard. A man who didn't show emotion easily, because life had taught him that feelings were something you kept hidden to survive. But even then, something about Clint set him apart. People noticed him tall, straight, reserved, mysterious. Women were drawn to him, men respected him. Without saying a word, he stood out, a quiet storm waiting to rise. His big break came in the late 1950s with the TV western Rawhide, and suddenly, the anonymous young man became a face recognized everywhere. Fans loved him, studios wanted him, and directors saw something different in him. A raw authenticity. And as his fame grew, so did the attention around his personal life. Clint Eastwood married his first wife, Maggie Johnson, in 1953, long before Hollywood fame arrived. She was gentle, intelligent, and steady, the kind of partner who believed in him when he had nothing. Their marriage began with hope and promise. Two young people trying to build a future together. But Hollywood has a way of testing love like nothing else. Fame has a shadow, and Clint soon discovered how easily success can complicate the heart. Working long hours, traveling constantly, living between film sets and studios, the separation alone strained their relationship. But more than that, Clint was a man who struggled with emotional boundaries. The world saw him as fearless and commanding, but privately, he wrestled with restlessness, a fear of being confined, a deep-rooted need for freedom. He loved, but he feared dependence. He wanted connection, but he fought against vulnerability. And so began the years that would later be described as a maze of passion and secrecy. As Clint's star rose dramatically through the 1960s, with the Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns filmed in Italy, he became an international sensation. His iconic roles made him the fantasy of millions. And with worldwide recognition came intense attention from admirers everywhere he went. Women were drawn not only to his looks, but to his mysterious, stoic presence, the quiet man whose silence spoke louder than words. And Clint, caught between public celebrity and private identity, allowed himself to drift into multiple emotional entanglements that complicated his life deeply. He was torn between loyalty and desire, between commitment and independence. It was a decade of secrets, secrets that he carried quietly, rarely expressing them out loud, but living them intensely. The strains became visible inside his marriage to Maggie, even as the world assumed they lived a picture-perfect Hollywood life. In reality, they were two hearts trying desperately to hold onto something that fame was pulling apart. Maggie loved him with sincerity, but Clint was changing, shaped by the world, by temptation, by pressures no ordinary couple could survive easily. Through the 1960s and 1970 seconds, Clint experienced a series of relationships that would later become public knowledge, each one shaping him, challenging him, and exposing the parts of his heart that he rarely allowed the world to see. He fathered children outside his marriage, relationships that were not publicly acknowledged for many years. These years were complicated, filled with emotional confusion, secrecy, and the constant juggling of different worlds. He tried to protect everyone involved, but in doing so, hurt became unavoidable. Yet despite the turmoil, people close to him said that Clint was not careless. He was conflicted. He was a man searching for something he never fully understood, a longing not for attention, but for connection. He once said privately to a close friend, "I've spent my life fighting to be strong, maybe too strong. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how to let someone in." Clint's emotional life was like a storm, powerful, unpredictable, sometimes destructive, but always driven by something deeply human: the desire to feel needed, to feel seen, to feel alive. During this period, he met actress Sondra Locke, and their relationship became one of the most talked about and most intense partnerships of his life. They first worked together in the film The Outlaw Josie Wales, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. On screen, they looked like two souls drawn together by fate. Off screen, their connection quickly grew into a real relationship that would last for more than a decade. Their relationship was passionate, fiery, and deeply emotional, but also filled with conflict and complexity. Sondra, like Clint, was strong-willed and outspoken. She was someone who demanded honesty, stability, and emotional presence, things Clint often struggled to give consistently. They loved intensely, but fought heavily, two powerful personalities colliding again and again. Meanwhile, Clint was still legally married to Maggie, living between two worlds that were never meant to coexist. The pressure was enormous, private tension covered by public silence. Hollywood whispered, newspapers speculated, and fans wondered. But Clint rarely spoke about his personal life. He believed that some things belonged to the heart alone. After more than 30 years of marriage, Clint and Maggie officially divorced in the late 1970s. It was the end of a long journey, filled with love, disappointment, forgiveness, and pain. Maggie later reflected with quiet dignity that Clint was a man who cared deeply, but could not stay in one place emotionally. She wished him happiness, even though their chapter had closed. With the end of his marriage, Clint and Sondra Locke continued their relationship openly, and for a while, it looked like they might build a lasting life together. They worked on several films side by side, becoming one of Hollywood's most talked about partnerships. Yet even then, Clint remained emotionally divided, wanting closeness, yet fearing the vulnerability that came with it. And so, the decade of secrets continued. Years marked by love and conflict, passion and silence, hope and heartbreak. Years in which Clint Eastwood lived both like a legend and like a man, wrestling with his own soul. To the public, he was invincible, the hero who never broke, who never cried, who always stood tall, no matter the storm. But the truth was much more human. Inside, he was a man trying to understand himself, a man searching for something no success could ever give him: peace. For Clint Eastwood, the greatest battles were not fought on dusty western streets or battlefields. They were fought deep within his heart, and those battles were far from over. Because the next chapters of his life would bring new relationships, new lessons, new controversies, and ultimately a transformation that few expected. A journey from turbulence to redemption. And the world would soon learn that even the toughest man in Hollywood carries a heart far more fragile than anyone ever imagined. Clint Eastwood's story continued to unfold like a long-running Hollywood movie, layered, unpredictable, dramatic, and deeply human. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Clint stood at the peak of fame. His films were smashing records. He had become one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood, and audiences around the world admired him as the face of masculinity, leadership, and an unconventional but magnetic charm. Yet, beneath the polished exterior existed an emotional storm, a personal life wrapped in secrecy, complications, and consequences that would shape him forever. While most of Hollywood adored the charisma Clint brought to his iconic roles, whether as the quiet, gunslinger, or the unstoppable cop. They knew very little about the real man who returned home when the cameras stopped rolling. Clint was private, almost painfully guarded. He hated interviews about his personal life and avoided emotional exposure, but those close to him often said he was a man full of contradictions, gentle yet distant, generous but emotionally closed, capable of deep affection yet terrified of commitment. And that contradiction would become the defining force behind the next decade of his relationships, a decade full of love, heartbreak, silence, and secrets that stayed hidden from the public for years. During his long marriage to Maggie Johnson, Clint's fame had risen faster than either of them could control. Their relationship had started with young dreams and quiet devotion, but fame changes rhythm, and Hollywood has a way of testing loyalty like nothing else. As stories began circulating about Clint's growing closeness with other women, whispers turned into headlines. Maggie remained poised, elegant, and heartbreakingly silent. She spent years trying to preserve the home, the family, and the promise they once made as teenagers. But Clint was a man constantly in motion. He lived with an inner restlessness, always seeking adventure, passion, and new emotional territory. It was as if the man who brought heroes to life on screen struggled to find peace off screen. The turning point came when Clint began working closely with actress Sondra Locke. Their paths crossed during casting, and although neither expected it, their connection sparked quickly and intensely. Their emotional chemistry was undeniable, both on screen and off. Clint admired Sondra's strength, independence, and willingness to challenge him. She wasn't intimidated by his fame, and perhaps for the first time, Clint found someone who looked beyond Clint Eastwood, the movie star, and saw the vulnerable man beneath. Their relationship became one of the most talked about, yet least understood partnerships in Hollywood. They acted together in film after film, each project deepening their bond, blurring lines between performance and reality. For Sondra, Clint became a breathtaking love story, unexpected, overwhelming, and all-consuming. She once described him as a man who felt like home, a protector and a storm all at once. But behind the moments of passion, there were shadows. They built a life together, lived together, and shared dreams, but legally, Clint was still married to Maggie. The emotional battlefield grew more complex. And while Hollywood adored the chemistry between Clint and Sondra, they had no idea about the painful silence happening behind closed doors. Maggie endured the heartbreak quietly, refusing to attack Clint publicly, while privately navigating the emotional collapse of almost 3 decades of marriage. Years rolled by. The movie industry watched years of rumors and speculation swirl around Clint, yet he said nothing. Silence became his shield. He would not explain, justify, or defend anything. His philosophy was simple: the work should speak louder than the gossip. But silence can be sharp, and sometimes silence hurts more than truth. Every passing year tested loyalty, dignity, and emotional endurance for everyone involved. Clint finally filed for legal separation, and after many years of silence and distance, his marriage to Maggie Johnson came to an end. It closed a chapter filled with memories, unspoken apologies, and deep scars. Maggie walked away carrying dignity rather than bitterness. She never tried to destroy Clint publicly. Instead, she chose grace. And though they would never be husband and wife again, they maintained quiet respect for each other through the years. That choice alone made their story unforgettable. The world assumed Clint and Sondra would finally begin a new life together, but destiny doesn't always follow the script we imagine. Their love continued, but cracks appeared slowly, first invisible, then painfully real. Arguments replaced laughter, disappointment replaced excitement, and wounds formed that neither could repair. What once felt like soul-deep connection now felt fragile and uncertain. The man who had outrun danger on screen for decades found himself unable to outrun emotional consequences. Eventually, the relationship ended publicly, painfully, and filled with legal conflict. Hollywood watched as former lovers became opponents, as private pain became media spectacle. Clint remained silent as always, refusing to fight with words. Sondra spoke from a place of heartbreak and loss. Both suffered. Neither walked away untouched. It was a reminder that behind fame, beyond wealth, love is still human, messy, complicated, imperfect, and capable of breaking even the strongest. The emotional aftermath changed Clint. The man once driven by restlessness began searching for peace instead of excitement. For the first time, he looked at life with deeper reflection. Friends noticed a quieter man emerging, one more aware of the cost of choices, more sensitive to the weight of his past, more thoughtful about the meaning of love. Even through heartbreak, he remained deeply respectful, never speaking unkindly of those he once loved. That quality alone made him different from so many others in Hollywood. Yet, despite everything, Clint believed in love again, and it was during this period of emotional rebuilding that he met a woman who would reshape his life once more. Someone gentle, steady, and grounded. A different kind of love story began, one without chaos or secrecy, a story rooted in healing rather than fire. It was a quieter chapter, but perhaps the most important one of his life. If the first part of Clint's journey was filled with motion and conflict, the next would be about growth, forgiveness, and redemption. A man once defined by independence would learn the meaning of companionship. A heart once guarded by silence would learn the courage to open again. Because every human being, no matter how legendary, eventually discovers that the greatest victory is not winning battles on screen, but learning to love without fear. And Clint Eastwood, the man the world knew as the ultimate tough hero, was about to begin a chapter that revealed his most vulnerable truth. As Clint Eastwood moved into the later chapters of his life, something remarkable happened. The man who had once lived in constant motion began to slow down, not in his work, not in his creativity, but in his heart. Age has a way of softening edges, reshaping priorities, and revealing truths we once ran from. For Clint, the years following emotional turmoil became a time of reflection, healing, and rediscovery. The world saw a legendary actor, celebrated director, an icon of American cinema. But behind every award, every film, and every public appearance, Clint was wrestling quietly with the one thing he had never fully mastered: love. After his long and painful separation from Sondra Locke, Clint found himself navigating life with a sense of introspection he had never known before. For decades, he had outrun emotional depth, choosing action over conversation, silence over vulnerability. But now loneliness arrived, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of realizing that success can't hold your hand and fame can't warm you at night. Despite everything he had accomplished, there remained an empty space in his heart, a longing for something real, something stable, something true. It was during this time that Clint formed a bond with Jacelyn Reeves, a woman who entered his life quietly, without the noise or attention that had surrounded so many past relationships. Their connection was different, gentle, private, non-judgmental. It was the first time Clint sought peace instead of excitement. With Jacelyn, he built a relationship grounded in understanding rather than public display. Though their story remained largely hidden from the world, it left a permanent mark on Clint's life. Together, they welcomed two children, Scott and Catherine, who would later become shining reflections of his legacy. Scott Eastwood, in particular, would grow to follow his father into Hollywood, carrying striking similarities in appearance, talent, and charm. For Clint, becoming a father again was more than another chapter. It was a chance to do better, to be present, and to soften the emotional distance that had once defined him. But life continued to twist and turn. Even as Clint tried to reshape the meaning of love and family, relationships shifted. His connection with Jacelyn eventually came to a quiet end, not dramatic, not hostile, simply a chapter that closed as their paths evolved separately. Yet, in a rare display of emotional maturity, they remained united through their children, avoiding bitterness and supporting each other with mutual respect. Then came another turning point in Clint's emotional journey: his relationship with actress Frances Fisher. When they met, Frances was a strong, passionate, deeply expressive woman who challenged Clint intellectually and emotionally. She wasn't intimidated by his legacy, and she offered a balance he had never experienced before. Their romance moved quickly, full of intensity and creative partnership. They worked side by side in film, and like many of Clint's relationships, the professional bond soon became deeply personal. Together, they welcomed a daughter, Francesca, who brought immense joy and a renewed sense of family into Clint's life. Yet as powerful and meaningful as their connection was, the same emotional patterns resurfaced. Clint's lifelong fear of confinement, of being tied down, of losing independence slowly dissolved what once felt unbreakable. The relationship began to strain under emotional weight neither could control. Arguments replaced passion, and eventually, the story that once seemed destined for forever came to a painful end. Frances was heartbroken, openly expressing the deep love she still carried, while Clint retreated once again into his familiar silence. He was a man who could command armies on screen, but when it came to love, he often felt powerless. The public wondered, how could a man admired by millions struggle so deeply with love? But the truth is simple: fame does not teach emotional balance. Success does not guarantee companionship, and even the strongest hearts have weaknesses. Clint Eastwood was human, and like every human being, he was learning through mistakes, through loss, and through time. As years moved forward, Clint entered a new era of transformation. Something inside him had shifted, perhaps wisdom, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps simply age. He no longer sought whirlwind romance or the adrenaline of secrecy. Instead, he desired peace, steadiness, and emotional clarity. It was during this time that he met Dina Ruiz, a warm, grounded, compassionate television reporter who interviewed him and unknowingly opened a new chapter of his life. Their bond grew into something sincere and stabilizing, and in 1996, Clint did something many thought impossible: he remarried. For the first time in decades, he chose commitment, permanence, and partnership. With Dina, Clint rediscovered stability and built a life rooted in family, laughter, and healing. They welcomed a daughter, Morgan, and for years, their home became a place of warmth rather than emotional chaos. Dina was protective of Clint's privacy, and he trusted her in a way he had struggled to before. Their marriage reflected a mature love, not perfect, but patient, gentle, and real. Of course, no life story, no matter how beautifully rebuilt, is without challenges. In 2014, after years of trying to navigate difficulties, Clint and Dina parted ways. But unlike past endings, this one held grace rather than anger. Both walked away with respect, friendship, and a shared devotion to their daughter. It was a breakup that reflected the wisdom Clint gained through decades of mistakes. He no longer fought in silence or hid in secrecy. He faced the moment with honesty and acceptance. Even after that chapter closed, love continued to find Clint not through drama, but through quiet companionship. In recent years, Clint has been connected with Christina Sandera, a restaurant hostess who entered his life without Hollywood spotlight, without expectation, without pretense. She offered simplicity, warmth, and authenticity. And Clint, now older, wiser, and more peaceful than ever, finally understood the kind of love he needed. No fanfare, no chaos, no battles, just two people choosing each other every day. Today, Clint Eastwood stands not only as a cinematic legend, but as a man who has walked through more emotional storms than the world will ever know. His love life, often labeled mysterious or controversial, is in truth simply human, filled with longing, mistakes, vulnerability, heartbreak, growth, and redemption. He has loved many, lost many, hurt and been hurt, but through it all, he evolved into a man who values connection more than control, presence more than pride, and peace more than passion. He once played heroes who survived gunfights and wars, but in real life, his greatest battles were fought inside his own heart. And perhaps the greatest lesson Clint Eastwood teaches us is this: it is never too late to grow, never too late to heal, never too late to choose love again. For a man who spent a lifetime portraying rugged toughness, The real strength he discovered was vulnerability. The real victory was learning that love is not something to conquer, it's something to nurture. And so, the story of Clint Eastwood's love life is not a scandal, it is a journey. A journey through silence and storms, through passion and regret, through secrecy and truth. A journey that reflects every human being who has ever lost love, found love, and continued believing in its power. Because in the end, the legend remains. But behind the legend was always a man searching for something we all desire: to love and to be loved, without fear.